So recently I went to get a tune for my bike. I'd done the exhaust, and I walked into one of the tuning shops around here, and they said, oh, they were fully booked out. And then they said, well, I said, that's okay. I'm not desperate hurry, And he's like, okay, well, when can we book you in? And I said to him, well, shouldn't I know how much it is first, And the interesting thing was, he then came here, and it was like, okay, so he looks up MT09SP, and he looks up the 23 model, and he's here, and he's looking at this, and he's looking at these very figures here that you can see here, right? And he's like, oh, and then he looks at me, and he says, that'll be about $850. And the issue is, why did he come here and show me this? Because this has nothing to do with it. They already own this. They only ever need to own one of these. And the reality is that to add an extra bike, program an extra bike that a customer walks in with using their existing one of these costs them $100. So how do I know? Because I bought this. The software and whatnot, and yeah. So I nearly bought this, which has got the extra wideband O2 sensor, and then I was worried about the fact that this O2 sensor has a different thread to the standard one, the one that's already in there, the narrowband one. The issue is, I sort of panicked and went, oh shit, because this won't fit in my existing port. It wasn't until later that I realized that even these guys, and the funny thing is, when I contacted them and said, oh shit, they didn't actually say it, but they actually sell an adapter. So you can just screw this straight into your existing factory port. But they refunded me the diff and just sent me this one. I'll actually go back later and probably buy this. And it really, once you go down this rabbit hole, it's a real eye-opener. Because the reality is that using this with the logged input from this O2 sensor for your actual air-fuel ratio in use is what the Woolich Autotune functionality uses to tell you how to remap your inputs. And it's better than you can get on a dyno. Dyno just gives you a chart with a nice little extra line on the top above the original line. It tells you how much extra power you've got. So, but I can give myself a whole heap of extra power just by modeling the throttle map. So yeah, it's kind of a bit bogus, but this system here, what it does is it just allows you to tune your bike for maximum efficiency. So you can get the right air fuel mixture going in at any point, any revs, any throttle opening, you can have it correct. And Woolich has got it all built into their software. Yeah, it takes a few starts before it starts up quickly. I don't know why it doesn't just download it. Actually, that's an interesting point, is that the software is a bit rudimentary, and I don't blame them. They're probably outsourced this, or they gave it to the one guy in their office that's sort of keen on it, but that's not their primary job. The problem is I do software, and if I was writing software for myself, it'd be this clunky. So I kind of understand why it is what it is, but I would definitely load everything at once because I wouldn't tolerate this. Okay, so this is the thing. Comes like this, pretty standard stuff. You've got to log in. I think this has already got me logged in. And yeah, going through it and finding what you want is a bit tricky. And at the moment, yeah, a lot of things just aren't enabled. So And a lot of their tutorials on YouTube and that are very different to this current version of software. They need a lot of updating. So what you get when you buy it is you get a license. One, they call it a bin file, but they may as well call it a license file, or they should call it a key file. It probably makes sense, but I mean, they're being literal. It is actually a .bin file, which kind of, makes sense. So you've got this choice of ECUs to choose from, and you can see here I haven't used one yet because I haven't plugged it into the bike, but you've got total number of keys used, none, number of keys remaining, 1, and I can purchase it. Now, the reality is I have to choose, I believe, and this is where the documentation really sucks, I believe that I have to, when I actually finally do the purchase, match it precisely to my bike. Now, I don't know which one's on the bike yet because, well, I haven't taken the tank off and pulled the ECU out. I'm hoping to actually read it. So I was actually waiting to get this laptop that I'm using at the moment before I could do that, because otherwise I had a desktop computer, or I had it on a computer that was an old work one that I had to actually give back in a couple of days. So I chose this one to have a play around with, and I'm not going to click new. Well, actually I will click new, and it brings you into this. At this point here, I can read stuff. Now this is where I'm going to cross my fingers and go down and plug it in and hope that I can actually read the details out and confirm that I have the right details. So I'm in Australia, if the accent doesn't give it away. And yeah, fingers crossed, this is pretty close to what we want. But here's where you start down a rabbit hole. And we want to unify the cylinder maps, and we want to maintain cylinder offset. Actually, let's explain why. So yeah, just turn that off. So if I come into fuel map, this is IAP, so this is inlet absolute pressure, which is basically the manifold pressure. So it's sort of the vacuum pressure on the intakes, like the engine side of the butterfly valves in the throttle bodies. So it's a bit tricky to sort of figure out because they don't have any labels across the top, but I believe in reality this is acceleration. So you've got the throttle wide open and there's just no pressure differential from one side of the butterfly valve to the other. This area here is your cruising area, right? And this area here is your engine braking area. So there's some areas I think that will just never get touched. So, like low down here, the idle is at 1300. So the idle's here, and you're never going to be idling. Well, you'll be idling while engine braking, but you're never going to be below that potentially unless the thing's about to stall. So all of this here is about having a smooth stall, because if you're doing these sorts of engine braking and you're idling like that, yeah, maybe you need to change down a gear or pull in your clutch. So I suppose, yeah, it is able to be hit. And here is the same thing too. You've just started it up with the throttle cracked wide open. Although probably, I think from initial start, this is probably, actually I should check because I've got it in the log. But anyway, we'll move on. So you can see there's actually a different map per cylinder. So I don't know which one's which. I don't know why 1 and 3 are different, because one's on the right side and one's on the left side. I don't know which one's which. But that to me just seemed really bizarre. But you have the option to play with it. But going back to the settings, if you come into here and you unify it and you tell it to maintain the cylinder offset, then when you come back in and you're looking at your fuel maps, you're just looking at one average map and the difference between them is maintained. So that's sort of cool. Now, when you're cruising at low speeds, like just around town, I generally sit between 3,000 and 4,000 RPM. So I'm sitting in this range here. and you're cruising around town just on idle throttle, and I know this because of the logs, this is the area you're in. And that's like sit in 60 or put in 60 kilometers an hour on cruise control. And this is where you're sitting. So these are the sorts of values. This is the actual cruising around town area. And that's the thing. You can sort of look at it and go, oh, okay, this is where I'm at. You have a separate fuel one, which is the throttle position sensor. There's two separate maps. So this one here is about how much you've got the throttle twisted on. In reality, when you're cruising around town, open throttle, you're sitting between 3 and 6% in this 3,000 to 4,000 RPM range. And you've got this range here. And the values for here and the values for the IAP are actually quite different. And that's I'm speculating here, but when you sort of start to look at these figures and you're like, hang on, that's why. Because the logs say I'm in these throttle positions, and the logs say that I am in that IAP value. And if the ECU is switching between throttle position and IAP, and I know there's a lot of comments that say, or a lot of things out there that say it doesn't start until 11, that's probably not true. And there's actually a few people that say, yeah, that's not really true. We have no idea where it starts or doesn't start. And it depends. I mean, if the engine thinks that you're encountering a hill and it needs to switch over, then it will. Or if you're going downhill and it needs to. So, yeah, it's probably doing a little bit of both. And in my opinion, I suspect that the jerkiness of it is related to that. Is that it's jumping between those figures at around, say, 1,600, 1,500, 1,600, and these figures here at about 1,200, 1,300. So that's a huge jump. You're talking about figures for much lower pressure. But the pressure is actually a lot higher. Although, to be honest, given my exhaust, the exhaust might have actually just, shifted the pressure by that. So maybe for me, what I need to do is I need to move all of this mapping from here and just drag it across a bit and rescale it. Because, it's just, this makes it too lean. But going back. So one of the other settings, ignition maps I'm not going to play with. That's a good way to blow your engine up. But you can see it has it per drive mode. Although that could be very interesting to see the difference between them. So if I come in and let's see, mode 1. I haven't actually looked at this one before. I just sort of avoid it going, I'm not going to play that game. So they're not that different. So, I wish you could block off bits, because this sort of area down here, this is idle. So 4.8, because of course you're not idling with the bloody clutch out, and mode 4 brain mode. Oh, okay. I wonder why it goes to there, because you're in idle. Okay. Anywho, wow, that's significant. Before top dead center, so it sparks really early, and in mode 1, sparks really late. So, and it's going so fast. Okay, you can glean some info from that. Now let's come back to limiters. No, rev limiter. I want to remove that. There you go. Simple as that. Advanced settings. You want to change your idle speed. You want to change your fan speed. Your fan cut-in temperature. I think that's on temperature and off temperature. Turn on at 95. Turn off at 90. But speed limiter. Goodbye. Closed loop. So that's your O2 sensor. So it stops it having an input back into whatever. Now, fuel cut. So this is a deceleration fuel cut. I haven't quite worked that one out yet, but when you're engine braking, and I think it stops the fuel going, like completely terminates any fuel going in, but you kind of need some fuel. Well, I believe this is about the harshness of the engine braking, and that's what I sort of suspect it is. But I'm in a position where I can just write a map to it, or write these settings to it, and write it with that not set, and then set it, rewrite it, and take the bike for a ride again and see what it does. Not sure about this one, and I'm not sure about this one, although, yeah. So, and that's the other thing. It's like trying to find info. Googling this is actually really, really hard. You're not gonna find much on it. So someone's gone through, figured out these things, doesn't really know what they are, I suspect. So someone's gone and done a read of the ECU, pulled out these things, seen a label on them, and thought, well, we'll put it in there. We don't know what it is, but we don't want to restrict it. We'll leave it for someone else to play with. They really should put a little caution thing on here that says we don't know what they are. Because if we knew what they are, we'd put proper bloody documentation on them. So anyway, this would be, the first thing I want to do is, I'm not really worried about the top speed limiter. Yeah, I've had the bike at speeds that would get me in trouble with certain authorities, like almost anyone that owns a bike has. But yeah, for me, this would be the first one, because what I want to do is I want to see if the jerkiness I'm getting with the exhaust changes are related to the O2 sensor thinking that I'm running rich, and because there's fuel flowing through because of the increased flow, which sort of fits with where I'm seeing on the logs on the iMap. Okay, other maps, what do we got? Oh, this one's cool. This is the electronic throttle valve. So you've got ride modes here, you've got what gear you're in. Okay, so if we say fourth gear, we say we're in mode 1, then this is how much we've got on the wrist. This is how much you've twisted the throttle with your wrist, is this top row here. All right, so if you're at 3000 RPM and you crank that throttle fully open, it will only give you 49% throttle in mode 1. In mode 3, still gives you 49%. All right. Now, let's see. So yeah, that's kind of, but that's a lot of twist. Now, if we go and say you give it a quarter twist, 13.5, in mode 1, that's 20.8, right? And that's in fourth gear. So if we go first gear and look at mode 3, yeah, it's still very similar, 13.5 and 17. So the modes aren't that different. Let's have a look at rain mode. Yep, 9. So it is really trying to look after you. So let's see, we go back to mode 3, and you can actually view, so you can actually view the maps. So if so you can see it's a lot more full through this midsection, but the peak is still the same. So that's more sort of linear, ramps up down here in this lower, so it ramps up in here, and that's cat being annoying, and yeah, you can see it climbs up and then sort of starts to flatten out, and yeah. And 4 is, whoa, yeah, you just don't get there. So that's kind of fun. 6th gear, let's go to mode 1. So yeah, mode 3, back to mode 1, and let's have a look at first gear to sixth gear. Yeah, it's not much different. So for the most part, playing with these, you're not going to see actually some of these are the same. And yeah, it's sort of tricky. So gear 1, that's going to matter for your launches, taken off of the lights. Gear 2 doesn't really need to change. Gear 3 is going to be about how you're cruising around town and your throttle response and stuff like that. So yeah, but it's interesting, just looking at the figures, you know, you've got 100% twisted on the wrist, but it's really only giving you, let's see, so you're at idle, taking off of the lights, you can divot that and you're really only getting 35% throttle to the wheel or to the engine. And it's not until you're up to about 5,000 you're half, and then up here, yeah. So of course, if you want to give yourself some trouble, you could just go and put this at 100%, and you'd be flipping your bike. So all good fun. Now, let's see. That's probably it for now. But well, so not sure about this. I actually have a Word document I'm going where I'm sort of writing my own instructions for what everything means. But yeah, limits, let's see, multiplier, not sure on that. Oh, torque mapping, I have no idea what this is. Deceleration, so this is how much when you're at these revs and you, so this for me is engine braking. So if you're engine braking in gear 1 at these revs, it will open the throttle to 6%. And if you're at these revs, it'll open at 0.4%. So it's just enough to keep it going. So that's, yeah. So if you want to lessen your engine braking, you could up these figures, and that would allow more air through because of less vacuum. So that's, yeah. And trim to me is ignition, and I am not playing with that. And yeah, so not playing with this either. That's the sort of stuff where you can blow things up. So, and you don't need to. So one of the, let's get back to this one. So data viewer, open a log file. We have our log file. And yeah, if we come into it, so we're sitting there, it's plugged in, ignition's on, not doing anything, we start her up. So we start her up, whatever, kick her into first gear, so we've got our gear here, first gear, and here's where we take off. And this is me going up the driveway, so we've got our throttle. Oh no, here's our throttle here. So, and this is the, this is the revs. So yeah, pretty much idling, just give it a little blip, whatever. And then, yeah, taking off up the street, quickly up into third gear. We should calculate a speed, that would be awesome. But then you've also got this log data. They've actually got a converter in it. Convert to CSV and TSV. So you can put it in Excel and have a play with it, put formulas on it, but there's a lot of data. And this is just a 20-minute ride. So yeah, and there's thousands of data. There's like 60,000 data points. But I was just going for a quick cruise because I wanted to see what it looked like. Now, in respect to, if we go and have a look at the log, this is what the log looks like. So this is me cruising in third gear. Third gear on throttle, not cruise control. So you can see the TPS is around here, and IAP, the manifold pressures about there. And yeah, if you go and look at these revs, this and this, you'll see a disparity between the two fueling values. So that's their log viewer. Now, if you have this is just the default one. If you have the full one with the wideband O2 sensor, you can actually do this Autotune thing because it adds in data for that, and it basically tells you your air fuel ratio, and yeah, that's ultimately what you want, and that's what the really good maps do. So it's one thing for me to come in and I'll get this how I want. But the proper tuners are actually not the guys with the dynos, because the dynos can't handle the ram air. And the guys with the dynos, and they've got they'll plug in a wideband O2 sensor in and sort of tune with that in, and they'll do that using potentially this and their live data thing. So they'll do that, and the problem is, there's no ram air working, and the MT09 has ram air intakes, and I've got a very annoying cat who wants to get out. Anyway, so the dyno tune just doesn't handle that. So any tune you get while it's sitting on a dyno is utterly pointless, because the instant you go out on the road, the conditions have changed. Right, you're getting air being forced into the intake, and it's going to change your IAP pressure. So, and that means that all your maps are going to be out. So all of these are going to be wrong, and you're going to need to adjust them once you get out. So with that other one and the logging, basically you come into Autotune, you load up. Let's see, this is our one target. So we've got our target, and then we open our log file, and boom, it'll have it in here, and it'll be able to do the delta, and it'll be able to actually just take that value and apply it back into the original one for both the IAP and the throttle position maps. And that's how you tune the bike. You tune the bike riding it around. And those tunes, so people might sort of say, there's a bit of attacking someone's dyno tune is like attacking their religion. They're not going to take it well, particularly given they probably spent $800 on it. But the reality is that, someone who's just doing a flash and they've worked out that tune with a similar configured bike, by riding around, logging it, and using the Autotune functionality, is going to be a much better tune, because it's actually real world conditions. It takes into account the ram air, and it takes into account all those sorts of areas. Like, they can do every gear. The data you can collect going on an hourly ride through the twisties and sticking it back in and tuning the entire map is, you can't go past it. You can't replicate that. You can spend one day riding around and you've already exceeded the amount of time anyone's going to put on your dyno. And you'll have done it in every gear, and you'll have done it, every RPM spot, or a lot of RPM spots. And in a lot of road conditions, uphill, downhill, flat cruising, maybe even some cruise control and stuff like that, really, so that's the difference. So the people offering a flash are actually the better tunes, presuming that they've done their flash properly. People offering the dyno tunes are, in my opinion, scammers, because in reality, they're not giving you the best thing that you can get. And Woolich even acknowledged that. If you go looking on their website and you go and talk about, have a look at these things here, and you have a look at some of their through their tutorials and things like that, they basically straight out say DynoTune doesn't cover it. Autotune is what you've got to do, and that's the best way to get it. And the dyno tuners would be out of business if it wasn't for Woolich, because Woolich are the only ones that can actually program these ECUs. No one else can do it. things like power commander and that. So we get back to here. Power commander and that can't sort of handle the dual maps here, from what I understand. And they can't handle this electronic throttle valve. They cannot handle the throttle position sensor not aligning with the actual throttle opening. So they can't handle electronic throttle valves. I'm 100% sure this is one of the things. So yeah, if you've got an electronic throttle valve, if you're ride-by-wire, those power commander tunes, they just won't work on your bike. So anyway, I'm going to wind this up.